Chapter 15. Varjak climbed for his life. The steps were slippery with ice. His paws skidded as he scrambled up. "Faster!" panted Holly behind him. "They're coming!" Sally Bones' gang were stalking towards the fire escape. They looked unstoppable. Only Mrs. Moggs stood before them, blocking their way. A few free cats rallied round her. Her marmalade fur looked bright and brave against the ice-white snow. Varjak's heart was exploding in his chest. He didn't want to leave her behind, yet he'd told him to go. The power was very far from him now. His brain felt bruised. How could Sally Bones enter his thoughts like that? Why did she pull away? He didn't understand, but there was no time for questions. He had to get away. "What's happening?" said Jess above him. "Keep climbing," said Holly. "Don't look." They kept going up the steps. A gust of wind swirled a snow flurry before them, blocking their view. They climbed into darkness. Varjak thought he heard a scream from below, but couldn't be sure. When he looked down again, the little cluster of free cats were surrounded. Sally Bones' gang swarmed round them like angry black dots in the snow. They were so much bigger and stronger than the free cats, but they couldn't climb the steps because in the middle of it all, Mrs. Moggs wouldn't yield to them. How long could she hold out? Varjak looked away. He kept climbing. Up. Just keep going. "Varjak!" shouted Jess a moment later. "Varjak, look down!" He didn't want to, but he steadied himself against the wind and looked down. A circle of space had opened around the fire escape. At its centre, he saw Sally Bones, shimmering with a terrible power. Beside her in the circle of space was Mrs. Moggs, but Mrs. Moggs wasn't moving. And, all about her, the snow was staining red. "No!" screamed Jess. "No, no, no!" The wind was howling like a wild animal. The fire escape was shaking like it would break in two. Varjak had to hold Jess back because she was mad with the grief and rage. Or maybe he was holding himself back because Mrs. Moggs was in a terrible trouble. But so was he. Sally Bones' gang began to swarm up the fire escape. Mrs. Moggs had held them off for a few precious moments, but no one stood in their way any more. "The rooftops!" Holly yelled. "We have to make it to the top!" They hauled themselves up. The steps grew narrower and shakier the higher they went. Varjak glanced back as he reached the top. Sally Bones' gang were climbing fast, closing in. He scrambled onto the roof. It was so high up here, exposed and precarious. The wind came in wild, sudden gusts. It was a flat roof with an open drop. No railings, nothing to hold on to. There was a huge chasm between it, and the next roof spanned only by electrical cables. The city was spread out below. On one side was a glowing network of amber lights, crisscrossing the city centre. On the other side was the river, cutting through the lights like a huge black snake, coiling through the night. Far beyond it, in the distance, stood those great glass towers, Sally Bones' territory. Varjak felt dizzy. The wind roared in his ears. The night sky was like a blanket over the city, a starless blanket of darkness that conveyed everything and everyone, darkness without end. Rooftops lay ahead of him, to the left and to the right, but they were all so far away, much further than he could jump. "What now?" said Omar. Holly scouted the edge of the roof. "Have a look at this," she said. They joined her at the edge. A thin red electrical line dangled between the rooftops, swaying in the wind. Tam drew back from it, eyes closed. "Oh, no," she said. "No way. I'm not crossing that." "It's this or Sally Bones," urged Holly. "Come on, who's first?" No one said a word. Varjak looked at Jess. She was shaking. "Can you do this?" he asked her. She didn't answer. She just looked up at him, eyes wet with helpless rage. "Will you do it if I go first?" he said. She wiped her eyes and nodded. "All right then," he said. "I will." He took a deep breath and strode up to the ledge. He glanced at the thin red line. He tried to picture it in his mind as a line painted on a road, safely down on the street. Not a perilous thread, strung high above the city. It didn't help. But Holly was right. It was this or Sally Bones, and anything was better than Sally Bones. Varjak placed a paw on the cable. It wobbled under his weight, but it held. Now he put another paw down, and another, and now all fours were off the roof, and he was balanced finally in space, tail held out behind him. He could feel the wind gusting through his fur, making him sway left and right. The cable wobbled. He didn't look up or down, just straight ahead. This is what you have to do, he told himself. Just go, and keep going till you reach the other side. He inched forwards across the void, inch by inch, paw by paw. The cable swayed and rocked with every step. Snow whipped into his face, his stomach churned. Surely he was going to fall. He was going to die horribly. He was going to... Keep going. Just keep going. It's all you can do. He kept going, paw after paw. He kept going, kept going, kept going. And then, somehow, he didn't know how, a paw touched down on solid ground. He'd made it to the other side. Yes, shouted Holly from the other side. Now you, Jess. Next, next, next. They came one by one, a line of cats crossing this chasm between the buildings. Jess did it with her eyes closed. Tam next. Then Omar, right behind her. As Ozzy crossed, the cable bucked beneath his bulk, but he made it too, until it was just Holly left on the other side. Come on, Holly, called Varjak, feeling lightheaded. Come on, it's easy. And then his heart lurched, and his head swam, and the words froze in his mouth, because right behind Holly, one of Sally Bones' cats was climbing onto the rooftop. Holly, he yelled, behind you! Holly turned and saw, first one, then two, then three of Sally Bones' gang stood on the rooftop with her. Holly sprang onto the cable. She moved rapidly, her spiky black and white fur rippling in the wind. She made it easily to the middle, but then she stopped and turned to face the Bones cats, poised above the void in space, now swirling all around her. Quick, Holly, urged Tam. You can make it! Holly shook her head. Her mustard eyes glinted, unafraid, as she stared at the gang cats. She looked calm and cool, deadly determined. She knew what she was doing, and with a sickening jolt, Varjak saw it too. Holly, he shouted. No, you can't! But the first of the Bones gang was already on the cable with her. He was a huge hulking tomcat. Under their combined weight, the thin red line looked taut, tight, ready to snap. Every nerve in Varjak's body screamed at him to get back onto the cable and help her, but it was almost at breaking point. It couldn't take any more pressure. The Bones cat was nearly on top of Holly. She stood there, facing him, crouching low as he came. Go, Varjak, she called. And as the Bones cat sprang at her, she took the cable in her mouth, sank her teeth in, and cut it clean down the middle. As Varjak watched in horror, it broke in two halves. Each half unravelled with a shower of sparks and swung back into the buildings on either side. The cable was gone. No one could cross it now. Holly had destroyed it. She twisted about and sprang towards safety, and Varjak's heart shivered with hope. But the Bones cat was quicker. His rough paws seized her back legs, held her, dragged her down into that horrendous gap between the buildings. They fell together, Holly and the Bones cat, whirling like snow and fighting as they fell, and fell, and fell away from view. Varjak's heart ripped in half. No, no, this can't be happening. Not to Holly, not to Holly, anyone but Holly, he yelled. He clawed at the edge of the roof, shouting her name through the wind and snow. Holly, he screamed. He couldn't see her anymore. She'd fallen into the void. She was gone. Varjak, said Tam behind her. We have to get out of here. He hardly heard her. All he knew was that Holly was gone. He'd lost Holly, who he cared about more than anyone in the world, and without her, nothing made sense anymore. Come on, said Tam, dragging him back from the edge, through the blizzard of snow. She knew what she was doing. He couldn't answer. He had no strength left, no words, just Holly's name echoing in his head, over and over and over again. Varjak let Tam lead him away from the edge, from the void, to safety. Each step away from Holly was like a claw in his heart. He couldn't feel his paws anymore. The pads were numb, as if they'd been ripped off or frozen by the ice, and it was just the wind and snow that stung his eyes, so he couldn't see his way clear. On the other roof, the Bones cats were climbing back down the fire escape. It was only a matter of time before they found another way up. Varjak's friends moved on first. They made him run in spite of himself. They rushed like the wind across the city skyline. They sprang across the gaps where they could. They climbed up and down fire escapes. They went over and under rooftops. They did what it took to get away. Sometimes they glimpsed Sally Bones' gang in the distance, hunting them, tracking them down, but Holly had broken the trail. She'd made sure they would not be caught. Beneath them, amber street lamps glowed in curving rows, spilling out of shapes of highways and houses, alleys and roads. They followed the lights back home. The flight over the rooftops took till dawn. They reached the secret alleys as morning lifted the black blanket of the sky, and the first street lamps flickered off. Exhausted, drained, at the end of their strength, they clambered down the fire escapes to their one safe place at last. Cludge welcomed them in with a worried-sounding bark. They were outlaws on the run. Sally Bones was after them. They'd lost Holly, and who knew what had become of Mrs. Moggs and the 3 cats? But they hadn't been caught yet. Safe for the moment, they slumped onto the cobbles and crashed into sleep.